If you're interested in Unity, especially the graphic stuff, then this video is definitely for you. Today I had the opportunity to talk to two brilliant members of the Unity rendering team who were able to explain a lot about what's going on with Unity in terms of rendering and graphics in that entire ecosystem, and really explain a lot of the changes and some details in how to get started, what to choose, and clarified some mistakes that I've been making. So if you're interested in these longer discussions, you think they're good and you'd like to see more of them, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and just drop a comment down below and let me know. But before we move on to the interview, I want to mention that Unity just released a big detailed ebook on the universal render pipeline that pretty much covers everything that you need to know about it. The book's an amazing place to get a better understanding of the universal render pipeline, and particularly for learning how to move your projects over from the built-in pipeline to URP, which is something that we actually talk about quite a bit in this interview. The book features many examples and follow-along projects and teaches you topics like lighting, shadows, shaders, post-processing, performance, and much more. In addition to the ebook, the URP team also has two great video tutorials. One is on converting custom shaders, and the other shows 3 really cool ways to use URP features. When I watched it, I was surprised at how easy it was to do really cool effects with almost no code or sometimes no code at all. I think it's really going to open up things for artists, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. I'll link both of those videos and the ebook down in the description, and at the very least, I recommend you go grab that ebook and read it. There's a lot of info in there and it's completely free, so check it out. All right, welcome guys. Thank you for joining me. Ali, you're the product manager for the graphics team at Unity, and Jonas is a technical artist on that team, I believe. Can you guys just introduce yourselves really quickly and say hello?
Yep, hi, I can start. So my name is Ali, and I'm one of the technical product managers for graphics at Unity. URP is one of the areas that I focus on being at Unity. I've been at Unity for almost 3 years now, but I have been working in the video game industry for 19 years now.
And you, Jonas?
Yeah, I'm Jonas. I'm a technical artist, yeah, as you said. And I'm embedded in the URP team, so I'm basically working with all the workflows. Every time we add a new feature, we want to decide how users should interact with this feature. I'm in on that design, and then also making content for marketing and engaging with users, and yeah, a lot of different stuff about how users will basically use URP.
Nice, making it kind of accessible so that everybody can actually start using it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, because I think that a lot of people are ready to make the switch over to the universal render pipeline. A lot of them already have, but the ones who haven't are kind of ready to make that switch. And I want to talk to you guys about where we are with that, whether or not they should, and kind of some of the benefits as well. There's a lot of stuff that I want to go into, but can you guys kind of briefly talk about the universal render pipeline and the scriptable render pipeline and kind of why it exists in the first place, why it's replacing the built-in pipeline, and just give a real quick overview for anybody who's maybe new to Unity and just like they opened up projects, they create a new one, and they don't know what these render pipelines are. Can you just overview that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So built-in is basically our original pipeline in Unity. It has been there for a long time for users to be able to actually create multi-platform, content. So about a few years ago, Unity actually looked at the scriptable render pipelines. So with built-in, it was multi-platform. It was customizable. We saw a lot of great content coming out of Unity with built-in. However, it was a black box for a lot of our users. A lot of the code was in C++ side, and it evolved over many years with different hardware coming out. So a lot of, even though it was pretty customizable, I mean, to be able to reach the best performance on each of these platforms, it was still quite difficult for our users. They still had to do extra customizations, and they couldn't have access to the core of, the heart of the pipeline because it was a black box. So we decided to go with the scriptable render pipelines, which is open, visible source. It provides the C# API out in the open. At the same time, we came up with two different pipelines, universal render pipeline, which originally was called the lightweight render pipeline, and the high definition render pipeline. And each of those actually serve a different purpose. But if you want, we can also talk about why we started with two pipelines and what is the long-term goal for these pipelines.
Actually, I think that would be really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about why there are two different pipelines there and what the thought is?
So I think to answer that, I want to touch on two of the important goals we have as part of our visions with the scriptable render pipelines. So one of the first and one of the most important goals we have is to reduce the cost of cross-platform development as much as possible for our users. We want to make sure that everyone is able to scale and deliver the games across a wide reach of platforms, of course, with the best possible visual quality and performance on each of the target platforms. Now, hardware continues evolving, and you can actually already see that the differences between the platforms on the low end versus the high end and the capabilities they have is vastly different. So having a one-stop solution for all these platforms, you're going to actually limit the performance and quality you're going to get on the extreme ends. So you're not going to be performant on low end if you have one-stop solution, and you're not going to have the best solution possible on the next-gen consoles, for example. So with the scriptable render pipeline, our goal was to reduce this complexity and provide the performance and quality out of the box for our users. Now, we have two pipelines. One of them is the universal render pipeline, which provides the optimal quality and performance on mobile, VR, and on the untethered hardware platforms. These are mostly tile-based GPUs. They are they're battery-based. They have thermal limitations, and they can't provide the same kind of performance the high-end provides. So we actually have optimized URP specifically for these platforms, while it actually provides the scalability across all the platforms that Unity provides. Now, on the other hand, to achieve the best quality on the higher end with the latest hardware that they require ray tracing or async compute, HDRP backend is designed to actually take advantage of that and provide the best possible quality and physically correct rendering out of the box for our users, so they don't have to actually customize or build these features themselves. Now, so these two pipelines so far have actually satisfied the needs of projects that actually either want to go cross-platform and don't really care about the best quality on the higher end platform. So for that you can use URP. On the other hand, you have games where they just target high-end PC and consoles, and they can utilize HDRP and provide the best quality of lighting and physically correct rendering out of the box. However, there is some projects that cross the boundaries between mobile and high-end. This is typically true for cross-play games, games that actually have a performance on lower-end spectrum of devices and very high quality on high-end. For the long term, while right now we actually have two different pipelines with the scriptable and the pipelines, for the long term, we actually want to make it easier for users to also have the full scalability for the full spectrum of devices, so they can actually ship a game on mobile with performance and actually have the highest quality on high end. This means they have to be able to use URP and HDRP for their projects. At the moment, though, to do this, you have to actually use two different projects in Unity, which means, for URP, you have to have your URP project, and for HDRP, you have to have your HDRP project. This is obviously not ideal for, a larger scale development, especially if you're actually having game as a service and you want to keep your game for a long time and you just don't want to port it and ship it. So we are also looking at improving that situation with both URP and HDRP. We have seen some games already doing this, with multiple projects or multiple Unity editor projects, such as Road 96 or the Lego Builder's Journey. But we want to also make sure that more of our users will be able to take advantage of the quality of HDRP on high end and the performance of URP on the the lower end or the wide platform reach that it has. So the things that we are doing as the next step to actually improve that situation is that first and foremost, we are working on something we call coexistence, which means you should be able to utilize both URP and HDRP within a single Unity editor project side by side. You will be able to you still have to author your content separately for different pipelines because they still have different workflow, different feature set. But this would be our first step. At least you don't have to actually have two different projects to achieve, using both pipelines. This also means that you can share a lot of non-pipeline dependent assets in your project. For example, your game logic, your networking, and so on. And you don't have to keep them separate in two different projects and keep duplicating and actually copying over. Second step we are taking to actually improve this situation is to improve the compatibility between the feature set of URP and HDRP. Certain things have different workflows in URP and HDRP right now. They don't necessarily have to. We can actually improve the situation. And we are working on that. And we have actually started working on this for the new feature set that we have shipped in the last 2 years. An example of it, for example, the lens flare. The workflow is actually similar for both pipelines. It was shipped at the same time for both pipelines. We have the new feature coming in 22.2, which is for example, the shader graph full screen target, which you can actually develop full screen, but it has the same basically stack for both of the pipelines. And additionally to making sure there's improved compatibility between the workflows and the feature set into the pipelines, we are also going to investigate what I would like to call a shared data model for lighting, post-processing, cameras. So the content that you develop can be understood by the backends URP and HDRP, and you don't have to reauthor or create different content for different pipelines when it's not needed. So short term, we have two pipelines because we wanted to actually make sure the ones who are going across the platforms and they wanted to go for maximum customizability and non-physically correct rendering, they have the option to do so easily. At the same time, we wanted to make sure those who actually want to go for extreme quality and physically correct rendering, they have the option out of the box as well. But for long term, we want to actually make sure users can actually utilize both to have both performance and the quality of HDRP for a single game within a single Unity editor.
That's actually really exciting. I didn't know that was coming. I assumed that they would be separated for a very long time. And I mean, the reasoning for them being separate makes a lot of sense. I totally understand it. So but I like the reasoning for bringing them back together if you're still able to keep that maximum quality and the great performance on the devices as well.
Yeah, so like a common case would be if HDRP has a water system coming out, and that water system might work very well on your high-end platforms, but then when you build to mobile, you'll have to come up with some other solution, and we want to be able to have that basically as easy as possible for users to basically say, on low end, I want this solution. On high end, give me the water that's in HDRP.
Oh, I'm really excited about that, and I think just excited about switching over to the new pipelines. And I was kind of curious, when do you expect to see the new pipeline or universal pipeline become the default, or do you expect that to become the default? Are we going to stay with built-in, or is it like 2023 or 24, or do you guys not know? Is there a timeline on that, or I'm just kind of curious. A lot of people ask me this question.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fair question, and I guess to answer that question, maybe I should touch on what exactly becoming default means and what are the requirements we have set to actually hit that milestone. So what does exactly URP default mean? I mean, when we say URP becoming default, it means that all our users are able to confidently utilize URP instead of the built-in render pipeline and achieve the same goals and use cases they had in built-in. So that essentially means at this point, there should be no reason to consider built-in anymore. You have the same functionality provided, you have the same performance or even better performance. So two requirements for us to achieve what it means to be default. One is the functional parity with built-in. With 22.2, we actually provide the majority of functionality offered by the built-in pipeline within URP. There is still a handful of feature parity items left that we're actually working on 23, but the majority of the features are there. In some certain cases, we're also exceeding the quality of the features over built-in in 22.2. So the second one is documentation. We want to make sure documentation and onboarding is in a good place when we actually make URP default. So when users start adopting it, they don't actually hit roadblocks, or they actually have a hard time finding information. We want them to have a smooth onboarding. This also mainly it's because the workflows in URP are not always one-to-one with what it was in built-in. We actually, to provide better performance or better artist workflows, we have changed certain workflows, especially for example, the pipeline configuration, the quality settings. We have to make sure these are documented so users actually onboard. And this is part of our goals in 22.2, and we're going to actually continue in 23. Now, to achieve the two goals, the two requirements, functional parity and documentation and onboarding quality, we think we're going to hit these two goals. Our current target is 23 LTS. But of course, we don't have a concrete timeline because we want to actually track the progress. We want to look at the user feedback and actually make sure we have perfectly hit these two goals for our users. Now, I know built-in is on, the built-in fate is on top of a lot of our users' minds. They want to know what happens to that. Should I start a new project with built-in right now? For 23 LTS, we will still support built-in. We don't have a plan for deprecation in built-in, even if you actually switch to URP default. So you can still use built-in. And we will announce the deprecation ahead of time to our users so they have ample time to actually start their migration to URP.
Nice. My expectation is it'll probably be a long time. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my guess is that built-in will probably be around and supported for longer than anybody at Unity will say, because they don't want to bind themselves to it. But I get the sense that it'll probably be around for a while. I do think that it's a good time for people to probably switch over to URP. You've mentioned that it's kind of at feature parity now, or very close. With, I assume there's maybe a couple little things here and there, and then some documentation. But is there anything big that would prevent people from jumping over? Do you recommend that people, assuming that there's nothing in the feature parity list that they need, make the jump now, or give it a try if they're not, obviously if you're about to release your game, you don't switch. But if you're looking at the new options for your future games, maybe, do you think it's a good time for them to start diving into it and using it?
Yeah, again, it goes back to the functional parity. If you have all the features that you need that already are shipped in URP, our recommendation is to start looking at URP. Mainly because if you start now, you're going to actually get the benefits of the improvements that is coming in the next releases as well. While in built-in, you actually have to start looking at actually making the move, right? We have a page on Unity documentation that gives a side-by-side comparison for all the pipelines, built-in, URP, and HDRP. And you can see what features are available in each pipeline and how do they compare to each other. So maybe the first step would be, if you want to move to URP, have a look at that, make sure the features that actually you need are there and they are provided. And if they are, our recommendation would be actually to look at URP.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that if you have like a project that maybe you're going to a game jam or something where like the lifetime of the project is shorter and the risk is low, I would say just go for it, because that will mature URP from our point of view as well, because if you hit some bugs or if you hit some workflow issues, that then you can report those things, and we're able to fix them. So I would say if you have a project where the risk is low, try it out, because it'll only benefit yourself because you then learn how to use it, but it'll also benefit us in our ability to mature the pipeline.
Yeah, that's what I've been recommending to everybody too. Just start your new little projects with it. If it's a big giant thing, think it through, but you might even want to go to HDRP. Just make a smart decision on a big project, but on the little stuff, I just kind of default to URP now. You'd mentioned new things coming in URP. Is there anything coming new to the Universal Render pipeline that you'd like to share or think people would be interested in or get excited about?
Yeah, I can start talking a bit about what's coming, what has landed in the latest beta, which is 22.2, and you can download it right now. We have the Forward Plus. So until this point, we've had the forward renderer and the deferred renderer, and a limitation of the forward renderer is that it has a limited amount of lights. You can do 8 lights per object, and if you have this like huge wall in like a corridor or something, and you have lights all the way down, you'll basically see lights flickering in and out and light popping. So we're fixing that with Forward Plus, which is basically a different way to send the data to the GPU that allows you to have way more lights. So instead of having a light limit of 8 lights, you have basically 256 you can put in the frustum, at least on PC. And the way it works is basically that instead of sending data to each object, it basically just determines, okay, in this tiny portion or in this tile of the screen, what lights are on there, and then basically only factor those in. So that's super exciting. It's going to be way easier to author your lighting when you don't have to constantly think about like the size of my mesh and what lights are touching it.
That's really exciting. I saw that one and got excited too. I was like, oh, sweet, unlimited forward lights or close enough to it. Like, oh, this is going to be great.
Yeah, it is really great and very optimized for mobile as well, which is super cool. Other things, we have LOD crossfade. So if you like you have LODs for your objects or levels of detail, and it can be kind of obvious when they shift and go down a level. So we added the crossfade, which is just like a smooth transition between the different LUTs. On decals, we're also adding support for rendering layers. We had decals in 21.3, but they didn't support layers. So if you had like a crack in the ground or something and your character was walking over it, he'll basically like receive the crack and get a crack in his foot or whatever, which is not great. But now we can support the layers. So you can basically put the decal and the ground on the same rendering layer, and then on the decal say please only project on this, and then your character won't break when you run on that part of the ground. And then we touched a bit on the full screen shader graph target, which is a way to do image effects. Something that hasn't been the easiest in URP is to do full screen effects. But now we're basically giving users a renderer feature and a shader graph target. So you add the renderer feature to your renderer, you assign a material that uses the shader graph target, and you can basically do like a bunch of stuff. You can do a vignette, you can do an invert of colors, you can do, I don't know, like a full screen distortion effect, or you could do like a lot of stuff, image effects, and replicate a lot of what's in the post-processing stack, or do your own stuff, which is really exciting. The thing with that though, one thing that's really cool is that it requires no scripting. So an artist can basically add the feature, open shader graph, drag nodes around, sample the different buffers. You might sample the motion vectors, you might sample the full screen normals or whatever. Do your thing, and then inject it in the pipeline without any scripts at all.
Oh wow,
that's really cool.
I didn't realize that one was that all the other ones I'd seen and was excited about that. That's very cool. Wow. Keep going.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to cut you off with all the cool stuff.
Because a limit of this, like the feature, the renderer feature, is that it doesn't work with the volume framework. So you might do your feature, you add the material, but you won't be able to drive it with properties from the volume framework. But of course, that's something you want to do. It works with our post-processing stack, the URP one, but also your custom effects you want to be driven by these properties in the volume framework. So we're adding another workflow for custom post-processing, and it's going to be very similar to the HDRP one, where you basically implement a volume component, which is a C# class, where you set up what properties you need in your volume component, and then that volume component will also contain some rendering logic. So you can basically get the properties from the volume framework, set properties in your shader, and then with some C# scripting, you can inject that into the pipeline and do whatever you want with them. It can be drawing objects, but usually what you would want to is do a full screen effect that way as well. So that's another way where you can use the shader graph full screen target, but use it in this volume component instead, and then have the effect driven by the volume framework, which is also cool. Excited to see what users can do with that.
Yeah, I'm excited too. There's a lot of stuff coming. I don't mean to cut you off, but can you bounce back to that LOD blending part a little bit and just explain that a little bit more too? I think people are probably not going to realize how awesome it is until they kind of hear about it. I read up a bit on this and it seemed really cool. It seemed like it's going to fix one of the most annoying problems in games with stuff popping in when you do LODs and then having to do a bunch of LODs to mitigate and minimize that. So how does that system work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for those who don't know, LODs are basically having several versions of your mesh that then degrade in mesh count to save on the polygons that have to be on screen. And up until this point, they would just instantly be swapped out. So you have a high poly mesh. When you get close to it, it'll swap to a lower poly, and it'll be very obvious. But now with the crossfading, you have two modes basically. One is distance based, so you can basically define if this is my model and this is the camera, and I'm moving closer to it. In this range, I might define a fade. So it'll basically swap between them using some kind of filtering. It can be like a blue noise, which is what the one we recommend, where it's so you basically slowly transition between the meshes. And it becomes way less obvious. And if your LODs are done correctly, you can basically it becomes unnoticeable, and that way you can really do a performance optimization to your game.
Nice. So yeah, I'm excited to see that one in action. I mean, all of these things sound really cool, but that one kind of popped into my head as like one of the things that drives me nuts constantly.
Yeah. So if you have a game with a lot of lights and LODs, you will basically go from ultimate popping to zero popping.
That's perfect. And now we have the unlimited lights with the forward renderer, or near
exactly.
unlimited.
Yeah.
So I'd like to move on. I got a couple other things I wanted to ask about. Some of the more technical questions that came in from other viewers and friends. One of the ones was about stacked camera layers and about doing post-processing on those different layers. So can you, I guess, first just explain what stacked camera layers are to somebody who doesn't know? I assume half the people watching aren't going to know what a stacked camera layer is. And then just talk a little bit about that post-processing and if there's a plan for it or what that is or why it's like that.
Yeah, so in URP we have the camera stack. So every time you have a camera in your scene, it'll draw to a texture basically, which will end up on your screen. We have two types of camera. There's a base camera and an overlay camera. And the base camera goes first. It's basically like it's almost like you drawing a piece of paper, right? You draw whatever's on the base camera, and then the overlay camera might see something different. It might see like a box, only a box, but then it'll draw that box on top of what was already there from the base camera. So you're basically drawing to the same texture over and over again with this stack of cameras, and the higher the camera is in the stack, the later it'll be drawn, and then that kind of dictates your result.
So would an example of that be like a first-person character or something, like with their gun sitting there?
Yeah, that could very well be an example. So, because what you can do is have different FOVs for your cameras, right? So in a FPS, you might want a very wide FOV for the game world, so you can see what's going on. But that'll like stretch your gun way out because it's very close to the camera, and it'll be all distorted. So only for the gun, you might want a quite narrow field of view, so you can keep it like fairly like in shape. So yeah, that's a good one. Also, if you're doing like, if you have a game and there's a storefront, and when a character interacts with like the merchant, a 3D render of the merchant will like pop up. That's also an overlay camera, right? Because you're now drawing this character from a different angle on top as like a UI element. So that's another case where you'd want it. So it's a powerful feature, but there is a problem with it that users have been talking to us about, and it basically is that in URP our post-processing doesn't preserve the alpha. And what this means in practice is that every time you apply post-processing to something, like in the stack. So let me elaborate. So you can have post-processing on each layer in your stack. So you can have post-processing on the base layer and the overlay and the overlay and the overlay, but it'll affect the entire thing. So if you have a pixel that was visible in the base camera, it'll basically get processed by each of the overlay cameras, each of their post-processing. So in the end, you'll have like a way over-processed image because you wanted something specific for your last overlay camera. And the reason it's like that is because we don't know anything about alpha at the point of post-processing. So we don't know which pixels have already been processed and which pixels are now added to the overlay camera and should be processed exclusively. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's still a little complicated for me even, so I'm terrible.
Okay.
This is good.
Okay,
I'm learning a lot. This is helpful.
Yeah. So basically, what you want to do is like, say you have like an Iron Man HUD thing, and you want extreme chromatic aberration on that. You want it only on the HUD. You don't want it on whatever Iron Man is seeing, right? You only want it on the edges. So what you want to do is only have the post-processing affect the part of the screen that's the actual HUD. And that's not possible now, unfortunately. But we are looking into it, and the aim is basically to add alpha to the post-processing stack. It's not trivial though, because you have different effects. You might have a depth of field effect that blurs part of the screen, and how do you manage that? Now it's not binary whether the overlay is visible or not, because now you have this fade, and you somehow need to blend it between the overlay that's blurred and the base camera, which might not be blurred. So there are a couple of edge cases that makes it a bit complicated, but it's definitely something we want to do. It's like at the top of our list. It's very requested by users, which means we just have to fix it, so they can make their games. And so we have some structural changes in the back on the backend side, but after that, it's basically the next thing we will do is to allow users to do post processing the way they want in their stack.
Nice. That really clarifies it a lot for me too. I really like that that explanation of it and how you kind of detailed it. It really now I really understand the problem and where the solution, I guess, is hopefully going to come eventually. That's exciting though. I think a lot of people will be excited. There were multiple people who asked me about that one, and there was one other question that a lot of people had asked about, which was distortion, which maybe this is somewhat related. It sounds like it might be, just that it's a little bit difficult to do distortion in game. I assume you got the same kind of issues where you're distorting the wrong things. Is that accurate?
I think the reason users are having issues with it, and which is a good reason, is that in built-in there was this concept of a grab pass, and I can explain that a bit. So in your shader, if you were developing a shader, you could add this command, which was a grab pass, and it would basically, at the point where that material was going to render, it would do like a screenshot of whatever was on the screen and pass that texture to the material, and then you could do whatever you want with that. So you could, if you like had a window that did a grab pass, the window would know what was behind the window and could then do some refraction or something, some kind of distortion. The problem with the grab pass is that it will do this for every object. So if you have 40 objects in your scene and they all have the grab pass command, you could have a situation where you're doing a screenshot, which is a pretty expensive thing to do actually. You could do that 40 times, and it might not be necessary at all that they are unique, but you're still doing it because that's the way the grab pass resolve things. Of course, you want transparency and you want distortion in your game. So what the URP team, or what we decided to do, is kind of attempt to design around that and basically provide a single grab pass that happened at a specific point in the pipeline. So you can draw your opaque objects, and then URP will do the screenshot and copy it to a texture, and then in your transparent objects you can then sample that. And we thought that was great and fine, and that would solve all problems, but evidently it didn't, and users needed to be more flexible. So basically what we want to do is modify this opaque texture copy to be modifiable, so you can do it at any point. Because the issue with doing it after opaques is that if you have a room and a window, and you're viewing the window from the outside, and maybe inside, and the window does some refraction, and inside you have maybe like bottles of potion, or you have like some vials or something that are also transparent, then those won't be visible, because the window, when it renders, it'll only know what was behind it at the point of the opaques. So they'll basically just not be visible. and that's of course a huge problem. So what we need to allow users to do is to like defer the copy, so they can draw the room, draw all the glasses, all the vials, all the potions, and then copy, and then draw the window. So that's basically what we need to change in order to support it. And what that will basically mean is that we'll need to provide a renderer feature similar to the full screen renderer feature. But what this renderer feature will do is it'll take in a property that dictates when it will do the copy, and then users can decide for themselves. And the result will be that users will kind of be, they will have to be conscious about when they do the copy, and they will never be in a situation where without their control they're just doing a lot of unnecessary copies. But they should still be able to have achieved the same effect as if they had the grab pads, basically.
Nice. So they'll be able to get that same effect without the performance cost of hitting it, like you said, once per object. That's nice.
Yeah.
It's good to see that you guys know about and are kind of addressing all of the things that people are mentioning and bringing up. There weren't that many problems that people had or questions with URP. Mostly just everybody was wondering, like, is it okay for me to just make a switch? Is there any reason not to? It seems like technically most things people are not having too many problems with. I was curious, though, for the people who are just starting out to switch over to URP, like maybe maybe even they're just new game developers or making one of their first games. Are there any just tips that you would recommend when it comes to using the universal render pipeline to make the game look good? Is there anything that they should like definitely try out, look at? Perhaps there are things that they should look deeper into and research that are like the easy, obvious wins. So you go to a new project that looks terrible and nobody's made it look pretty at all. Like, are there a couple like first things that you just do that are going to go from, you know, maybe from a 1 to a 5 at least instead of a 2 to 10? They just kind of bump you up there.
Yeah, I guess you mentioned earlier that you sometimes create a project from the built-in and then you just basically want to convert that. That'll probably get you in a state where URP is not looking its best. So I would really recommend starting, like if you're new to URP, start from one of the templates and dig around and see what assets are added to an empty URP project. Because if you want SSAO, that'll need to be added to the renderer. If you need post-processing, that'll need to be set up as well. So if you like from a completely blank built-in template, there are quite a few steps to upgrade, because built-in doesn't add these for you automatically. So I would recommend basically starting from the URP template if you want to play with it, to make sure that you're getting the features that you need. That's
really good to know, because I didn't realize that. For some reason, I just assumed that using the upgrade was the same as going in there. But now that you mention it, there's probably quite a bit in the templates that doesn't just auto-translate over to any project. So I'm going to have to do that and kind of do a nice visual comparison. I'm kind of curious now.
Yeah, the thing is that the built-in template is really empty. So it doesn't come with post-processing. So when you run the converter, it'll basically convert a project that doesn't have post to a URP project that doesn't have post. So that's why you want to start with the template, because then you're set up and everything is added already.
Yeah, and I guess we also have some package samples. So every package in Unity comes with samples. And we do have a lot of actually good simple samples for you how to do different things in URP. That's another good actually resource for users. If they want to start, they can download it from the package manager. We also recently released an ebook, which is like a comprehensive guideline on URP and how the workflows work, how the different features work, how do you configure your lighting, how do you configure your post-processing, shaders and all that kind of stuff. So also that's another good one. I think it's called Learn Universal Render Pipeline for Advanced Unity Creators. That's the ebook that we recently released. So it does touch on a lot of detailed details about lighting and different configurations in URP as well, how to make it look good as well. So
yeah, I've seen that book was great. It's full of a lot of really good info, and I'll make sure that we link that too. And I saw CodeMonkey did a nice video kind of outlining some of the key features and highlights in that ebook too. That was really good. And there's a lot of info there, and it seems like it's the most up to date and probably the best reference source for the URP system. I did want to also mention the blogs that you've been doing, though, because they're really handy as well. A lot of the things that we talked about today are kind of loosely mentioned, and then some even detailed links in some of those blog posts, along with some really cool videos that detail how to do cool things like see through spy glasses to look through objects, or show a character through walls with zero code. Extremely simple setup to do it. If you've been trying to do something like that, those character outlines, you should definitely check it out, and then check out the ebook as well. And I think just make the jump to URP, start experimenting with it and trying it out. Do you guys have any just final recommendations or words for people watching who are looking to start jumping into rendering stuff, or switching rendering pipelines, or just wanting to make their game beautiful, or maybe they've got some feedback or thoughts that they want to send to you? You guys have somewhere that they can do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like, if they want to provide feedback, I mean, we always look for feedback. We have the forums, and we actually constantly scan the forums. Like, for example, the problem with the post-processing that you brought up actually was in the forums. We actually were very interactive with the customer, so that's a good source for them. If they actually want to ask about something or they have feedback, they can go to the forums. We also have our roadmap page, which it provides information on what's coming up. All the stuff we have talked today, actually, it is already on there. It provides some details of what is the use case, what does it mean for this feature to actually be available, and what does that do for you. And if there's anything missing that actually users are looking for and it's important for them, there's an option also for them to submit and make a feature request. And we actually triage these feedbacks with the teams internally. So that's a good place to start giving us feedback. I guess for switching the pipelines, again, I guess we don't want, if you're already in built-in and you are happy with the state of it and you're actually close to shipping your game, maybe you shouldn't actually look at the conversion rate, the conversion of the pipeline, because that's going to add additional cost for you to convert and learn about URP and so on. But if you're starting a new project, I mean, we highly recommend, looking at either URP or HDRP and see which one actually fits your use cases better. URP arguably is a lot easier to pick up and learn. It's more closer to actually what built-in used to be. So if you want to actually have like a lower learning curve and start quickly, probably URP is something you want to actually start looking at. But obviously, if you really want to reach the fidelity, the high fidelity on the higher end, HDRP actually is where you want to start looking at. But of course, you will have the limitation of the platform reach, which is, the PC and consoles. Having said that, HDRP provides a lot of good learning materials as well. They have done a lot of good ebooks. There's a definitive guide on HDRP lighting, which is amazing. I think I recommend it to all the technical artists to actually look at that. And also documentation in HDRP is amazing. It's actually a good source for starting. So if you're starting a new project, maybe actually have a look at the state of the pipelines in the release you're going to start and see if it actually satisfies your needs. Maybe start with the scriptable render pipelines than sticking with the built-in pipeline, because we actually believe we are reaching a point where a lot of the functionality that actually wasn't built-in are either provided in the pipeline as the new pipelines, one-to-one, or they actually have a better workflow, better performance, or better quality in the new pipeline. So actually, you would get the benefits of improvements over time as well as you build your game.
I think that's good advice. I found it to be easier to work with the new ones now than the built-in. That didn't used to be the case, but recently, I'd say in the last year or so, it's become quite a bit easier to work with URP. And we didn't really talk a lot about HDRP, but I got to say that one of my favorite things to do when I get new art is to just drop them into a well-lit HDRP scene and look at how pretty they look for a few minutes, like set up some camera shots. I'm like, look at this cool art. And then I'll go drop it into my actual game.
You're not the only one.
It's a lot of fun, though. I love doing that, and then setting them up. Sometimes I'll set them up on a little screen, animating in the background and stuff, and you get some cool new characters. Because without me even being good at it at all, they look beautiful. Like, I just put them in, and they look great, and I'm like, wow, I'm a terrible artist, and this still looks good. So I love it, and I've been really impressed with what you guys have been doing, and the all the work that's been coming out of it. The new render pipelines are really exciting, and I'm excited to see the performance and also the part that we talked about at the beginning. I'll let everybody go back to it, but where you're talking about kind of the future of them coming together, I think that's really exciting as well. So I wanted to say thanks to both of you, Jonas and Ali, for coming out here. This is really exciting and really instructional, and I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody watching learned a lot too, and comments and lets us know. And if you guys have questions, please make sure that you go to the forums and ask them. And if you got feedback as well or run into any bugs, I'm sure they'd love to know and get those figured out and fixed as quick as possible. So thanks again, guys. Any final words before we go?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we are looking to the feedback from the users.
All right. Thank you, guys. Also, don't forget to check out the URP ebook. There's a lot of great info down there. You can see a lot of the things that we talked about and a whole lot more. And you can download it for free just by clicking the link in the description.